The night smelled of rain and distant car exhaust. The neon glow of Los Angeles flickered in puddles on the sidewalk, distorting the city like a dream unraveling at the edges. People hurried by, heads down, lost in their own worlds. Some were scrolling through their phones, others muttered into their AirPods, but no one paid attention to the man on the corner. He sat hunched over, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, as if trying to disappear into the oversized jacket that did little to keep out the cold. His fingers, raw from the wind, gripped an old paper cup, long emptied of whatever few coins strangers had tossed his way earlier. His name was Michael, but no one ever asked. His breath came out in uneven puffs. Hunger gnawed at him, but worse than that was the weight of invisibility. He had been sitting here for hours, yet no one had seen him. Until now. A man in a dark hoodie and jeans walked past. Then suddenly, he stopped. Slowly, he turned back, stepping toward Michael. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but as he crouched down, the streetlight caught the unmistakable features beneath. Keanu Reeves. For a moment, Michael thought his mind was playing tricks on him, a cruel mirage sent by exhaustion. But then, Keanu spoke. "Hey, man. You doing okay?" The words were simple, but Michael had forgotten what kindness sounded like. For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't ignoring him. Someone saw him, and that changed everything. Michael hesitated before answering. What was there to say? He could have spilled out everything. How he once had a home, a family, a job. How one bad decision had snowballed into another. How he had been living on the streets for over a year, watching life pass him by like a movie he was no longer a part of. But instead, he just muttered, "I've been better." Keanu nodded, not pressing. He glanced at the nearly empty cup by Michael's side, then at the way the man's fingers trembled slightly from the cold. He reached into the brown paper bag he had been carrying and pulled out a sandwich. "Here, I was going to eat this, but you should have it." Michael looked at the offering, then at Keanu. He wasn't used to kindness coming without strings. Hesitantly, he took the sandwich, the warmth of the bread almost shocking against his frozen fingertips. "Thanks," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from disuse. Keanu sat down beside him, right there on the dirty sidewalk. People walked past, some slowing down when they realized who was sitting there. A few even pulled out their phones. But Keanu didn't seem to notice or care. "So, what's your story?" he asked. Michael let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "My story," he echoed. "I doubt you want to hear it." Keanu shrugged. "I've got time." For a long moment, Michael said nothing. He wasn't used to people asking. He wasn't used to anyone caring. But then, something about the quiet sincerity in Keanu's expression made him speak. "I used to work construction," Michael finally admitted. "Had a wife, a daughter." His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. "Then, one day, I got injured on the job. Couldn't work for months. Bills piled up. My wife, she tried to hold everything together. But," he exhaled sharply, shaking his head, "she left, took our little girl with her." Keanu remained silent, listening intently. "I started drinking," Michael continued, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Didn't have anywhere to go. Lost my apartment. Just kinda ended up here." His words hung in the air. For the first time in years, he had said it all out loud. He waited for Keanu to respond with pity, maybe an awkward attempt at comforting words. But instead, Keanu simply said, "I get it." Michael frowned. "You? Nah, man. You don't get it." Keanu let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You'd be surprised," he murmured. Then, after a beat, he added, "I lost my best friend when I was young. River Phoenix. Overdose. It shattered me." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "And my daughter," Keanu's voice softened. "She was stillborn. Lost her and her mother, too." Michael looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, he saw not just Keanu Reeves, the movie star, the action hero, but a man who had felt lost, too. A man who had been broken but had somehow kept going. "I don't talk about this much," Keanu admitted, "but I know what it's like to feel like the world forgot you." Michael swallowed hard. He had expected a stranger's pity. He hadn't expected understanding. They sat there in silence for a while, the city buzzing around them. But for once, Michael didn't feel like just another ghost on the sidewalk. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him. Hope. Michael sat in stunned silence, the sandwich half-eaten in his hands. The warmth of the bread had already faded, but his fingers still clung to it as if afraid to let go. Across from him, Keanu Reeves sat cross-legged on the damp concrete, his dark jacket blending into the night. The Hollywood star wasn't rushing him, wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't treating this like an act of charity. He was just there. Michael cleared his throat, unsure how to process this moment. So, you're just what? Sitting here? Not worried about getting swarmed or something? Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. Nah, man. People see me all the time, but how often do they really see someone like you? Michael swallowed hard. The words hit differently, because they were true. He had been invisible for so long. Another ghost on the sidewalk that people walked past, a faded backdrop to their busy lives. Guess you got a point, he muttered, his voice quieter now. Keanu shifted slightly, stretching out his legs. You ever think about getting back on your feet? Michael scoffed, shaking his head. You make it sound easy. I know it's not. There was no pity in Keanu's voice, just understanding. And for some reason, that was worse. Because pity was easy to ignore. But understanding? That hit somewhere deep. Michael rubbed his hands together for warmth. It's not just about wanting to, man. It's everything. Once you're down here, the world keeps you down. No ID, no address, no job. One wrong step and it all spirals. People don't get it. They think it's just about being lazy or making bad choices. He exhaled sharply. Sometimes, life just chews you up and spits you out. Keanu nodded. Yeah, I get that. Michael frowned. No offense, man, but you don't. You're, Keanu Reeves. Keanu's lips twitched in a sad smile. I wasn't always. And even now, life doesn't care how famous you are. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. I lost my best friend when I was young. River Phoenix. That kind of grief? It never really leaves you. Michael stared at him, startled by the shift. I lost my daughter, too, Keanu continued, his voice softer now. She was stillborn. And then, her mother. She passed away in a car accident. Michael blinked. For a moment, the world around them blurred. The people walking by, the hum of traffic, the glow of neon signs. I don't tell a lot of people this, Keanu admitted, looking down at his hands. But there were nights I didn't think I'd get through either. Silence stretched between them. Michael finally exhaled, shaking his head. Damn. Keanu looked up, meeting his eyes. You don't have to stay stuck, man. You're still here. That means there's still a way forward. Michael let out a dry laugh, but it wasn't bitter. More like exhausted. And what? You got some magic answer? Keanu smirked. Not really, but I do have an idea. Michael narrowed his eyes. Oh yeah? What's that? Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded-up piece of paper. He unfolded it and smoothed it out on his knee. It was a list of nearby shelters, food kitchens, and resources for people trying to get back on their feet. Some handwritten notes were scrawled in the margins, things like, "Tell them John sent you," and "Good place, no judgment." Michael stared at it, his throat tightening. You just carry this around? Keanu shrugged. Never know when it might come in handy. Michael hesitated before taking the paper, his fingers shaking slightly. No one had ever given him something like this before. Something real. Not just words, not just empty sympathy. A chance. And that scared him more than anything. Michael didn't know why, but that night, he didn't go back to his usual spot. Instead, he walked. For the first time in a long time, he followed a street not because he had to, but because he wanted to see where it led. His fingers clutched the folded-up paper, as if afraid it would disappear if he let go. He found himself standing outside one of the places Keanu had listed. A shelter that didn't ask questions, didn't make you feel like you were nothing. He almost turned around. Almost. But then, He thought about that moment on the sidewalk. Keanu, sitting there without hesitation, seeing him, and he stepped inside. Days turned into weeks. Michael got a warm bed, a meal that wasn't scraped together from leftovers, a shower that washed away more than just dirt. It washed away the feeling of being lost. A few weeks later, the shelter helped him get in touch with an organization that specialized in helping people rebuild their lives. They helped him track down his old documents, helped him apply for work. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, bad days, days he almost gave up. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered that night. He remembered Keanu saying, "You don't have to stay stuck, man." And that kept him going. Months later, Michael found himself standing outside a small cafe, wearing clean clothes, holding a cup of coffee in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was his first paycheck in years, and it felt heavier than it should. Not because of the money, because of what it meant. Because for the first time in forever, he wasn't invisible. He was living. One evening, Michael walked down a familiar street. It had been months since that night, but it still felt surreal. He had no idea if Keanu would even remember him. But then, there he was. Keanu was walking out of a convenience store, a brown paper bag in hand, when he spotted him. Michael's heart pounded. For a second, Keanu just looked at him. Then, his face broke into the biggest smile. "Michael," he said, his voice warm. "You look good, man." Michael swallowed hard, nodding. I got a job." He laughed, almost disbelieving his own words. "An apartment. It's small, but it's mine." Keanu grinned. "Hell yeah, man." Michael took a deep breath. I wanted to say thanks. For that night. He cleared his throat. For seeing me." Keanu patted his shoulder. "You did the hard part, man. I just reminded you that you could." Michael laughed, shaking his head. "Still, thank you." Keanu winked. "Pay it forward, all right?" Michael smiled. "Yeah, I will." Michael took a slow sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him as he stood beside Keanu on the Los Angeles sidewalk. The city hummed around them, cars honking, pedestrians brushing past. But in this moment, it felt like just the two of them. "So, how's life treating you?" Keanu asked, leaning against a street lamp. Michael exhaled, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. "Man, I still wake up sometimes thinking I'm gonna be back on that sidewalk. Like it was all a dream, you know?" He looked down at his cup, his rough hands wrapped around it. "But then I get up, put on my work boots, and go to my job. And I remember, it's real. I made it." Keanu smiled, nodding. "That's what I like to hear." Michael's gaze turned distant. "You ever wonder why people do the things they do?" Keanu tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Michael sighed, gripping his coffee tighter. "Like, why you stopped that night? You could have kept walking, man. Why did you stop?" Keanu studied him for a moment before answering. "Because someone once stopped for me." Michael frowned slightly. "What?" Keanu took a deep breath, looking up at the streetlights. "When I lost everything, my daughter, her mother, I was lost, man. Grief hits you like a storm. And one night, I was sitting in a park, just not wanting to be here anymore." He let out a quiet laugh, but there was pain behind it. Then this old guy, homeless, kind of like you back then, he sat down next to me. Didn't know who I was. Didn't care. He just talked to me. Told me I wasn't alone. Michael swallowed hard. "Damn." Keanu nodded. "That's why I stopped. Because someone once reminded me I mattered. And I figured, maybe you needed to hear that too." Silence stretched between them. Michael clenched his jaw, blinking hard. "You know, it's funny. I used to think people like you, celebrities, had it all figured out. But now, I see. We're all just trying to make it through, huh?" Keanu smiled. "Yeah, man, we are." For a while, they just stood there, sipping their coffee, watching the city move. And then a screech of tires. A sudden blaring horn. Keanu's eyes snapped toward the street just in time to see a black SUV running the red light, barreling straight toward a woman crossing the road. Michael saw it too. His body moved before his mind even registered what was happening. He ran. The woman, An older lady clutching a grocery bag was frozen in fear. The headlights of the speeding SUV reflected in her terrified eyes. Michael lunged forward. The impact was brutal, not from the car, from Michael. He slammed into the woman, shoving her out of the way with everything he had. She tumbled onto the sidewalk, safe. But Michael, the SUV hit him full force. The sound of bone against metal, the sickening thud of a body hitting the pavement. Keanu felt his stomach drop. Michael! The SUV didn't stop. It kept going, disappearing down the street as bystanders screamed. Keanu rushed forward, kneeling beside Michael's crumpled body. Blood seeped onto the pavement. Michael's glassy eyes blinked slowly, unfocused. Keanu's hands trembled as he grabbed Michael's shoulders. Hey, stay with me, man. Stay with me. Michael coughed, blood staining his lips, but somehow, he was smiling. Guess I paid it forward, huh? He rasped, voice weak. Keanu's throat tightened. No, man. No. You're gonna be okay. Just hang on. Sirens wailed in the distance. Michael exhaled shakily. Hey, Keanu? Keanu swallowed hard, leaning in closer. Yeah, man. I'm here. Michael's lips twitched. Thanks for stopping that night. And then, his chest fell still. Keanu froze. A deep, hollow silence swallowed the street. The sirens blurred into the background. Keanu felt his hands trembling against Michael's unmoving shoulders. No, his voice cracked. Michael was gone. The world moved on. The sun rose over Los Angeles, casting golden light over the same streets Michael used to wander. A small memorial appeared on the sidewalk where he had died. Flowers, candles, a photograph of him, taken by someone at the shelter after he got his job. He looked happy, alive. Keanu stood in front of it, staring at the flickering candles. His hands clenched into fists. Michael had spent so many years feeling invisible, but in the end, he was the one who had saved someone else's life. Keanu exhaled sharply, his chest tight. Then, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the same list of shelters he had given Michael. Slowly, he unfolded it, smoothing out the wrinkles. And then, he walked away, looking for the next person who needed to be seen. Because this wouldn't end here. Not if he had anything to do with it. Michael wasn't just another homeless man. He wasn't invisible. He mattered. Because one night, Keanu stopped. And because of that, Michael changed his life. And in the end, he saved another. Because sometimes, the people who were once forgotten become the ones who make the biggest difference.